What's up, everybody? Welcome to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about the Season 5 long-range meta. The website is fully updated at this point with all of the Season 5 changes. I'm literally going to go through 30 different weapons today because there's so many different guns that are relatively close to meta and very viable. So it's going to be a long video, so strap in. Let's jump into it, and we will talk about Season 5 long-range meta. Are you tired of this?
Person D's, Josh.
What? I'm literally around the corner. And you want more of these? Let's go. Bah, 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 bah.
Good stuff. Could have gasplayed around us. He could have.
He's right there.
That was weird. Alright, let's go. One more.
And our sponsor for today's video, Legion Farm, may be for you. Legion Farm gives you the opportunity to play with some of the absolute best players in the world. They have over 1,200 Warzone pros on their website ready to play at any time of day. And they're legitimately some of the best players in the world. World number 1, Warzone kills and score. World number 2, kills. This guy averaged 15 kills per game, which is just off the charts, insane good. Playing with these level of players, not only are you going to have more fun because you're just going to have a great squad to play with, you're also going to get a lot better just at the game overall because you're going to learn from playing with these guys. When you log in, any time of day, there's going to be pros ready to play. It's super simple. You can just scroll down this list, find a group you want to play with. Sometimes there'll be 2 pros in a group. Sometimes there'll just be 1. And you just click join the party, and literally within minutes, you'll be squatted up with the pro, and you can jump in and have just amazing Warzone games. So if you're interested in having more fun, winning more games, and all the while improving your own play, head over to legionfarm.com and use my special promo code TGD10 to get 10 free dollars added to your account after your first session. And a big thanks to our friends over at Legion Farm. All right, jumping straight into this. I've talked about this a lot before, but in my opinion, the most important thing to look at first for long-range meta is just purely how accurate a gun is. So basically what I did for all these accuracy ratings in column H here is I went into Caldera, dropped in, built the gun how I felt the recoil was the absolute best. And then I shot at a target about 60 meters away and tried to, roughly determine like what percentage I thought I could hit on that target. So I use just like a window, so just like the shape of a window, a little bit bigger than a person, but it's a relatively good thing to aim at just to get a feel for how accurate you're going to be. So these are kind of rough numbers, and these are my personal numbers. They could be different for you, especially if you're on controller, because I use mouse and key. I am getting a lot better at controller. A big part of that is so I can make my videos better, because I want to also give recommendations that are more tailored to controller. In general, they're very similar, but there's some slight differences every now and then. So I'm kind of training myself up on controller to be a good controller player as well. But yeah, these are my personal numbers. If you really wanted to know your own accuracy ratings, I would jump into, a match on Caldera and do the same thing that I did, where you actually shoot a target and you just kind of get a feel for how many shots you can put in that window frame from about 60 meters away. So first up, we've got the Fin here. The Fin is a Modern Warfare gun, so I've got these color-coded based on which game they're from. Modern Warfare, Vanguard, Cold War. I give them a Caldera score, so this is how good they are on Caldera in my opinion. And I'm going to also do a small map score, so like Rebirth and Fortune's Keep. I'll be doing that probably later this week. We've got the accuracy column, close TTK, so this is TTK in the first range. Damage drop-off, pretty much all ARs and LMGs have 1 drop-off or 0 drop-offs. So that's why I include that. And then we get the long range TTK. This is going to be the TTK after that 1 drop off. And then the weighted average TTK. This is essentially the same thing that I did in my SMGs video from about a week ago. Except instead of just being the integral, I take the integral and then I divide it by the total range that integral was over. And that gives essentially a weighted average time to kill across that distance. I don't know which one I like more, because really the integral, like, this isn't a real TTK. This is not a number that can ever actually happen with the guns. So that's why I don't like calling it a TTK, because it's kind of misleading. It's kind of why I like the integral more, because it's clear that that's not an actual TTK. But they have the exact same meaning, essentially. They're just scaled slightly differently. But anyway, so the Fin, first gun we're going to talk about, amazingly accurate. It's the most accurate gun in the game in my opinion, but it has really bad TTK and really bad mobility, so that's what holds it back. It has decent bullet velocity. Next up, we got the KG M40. So M40, this was obviously the meta for a long time. It's super accurate. I gave it a slightly higher score than the Fin because it still has bad mobility, bad ADS, and bad TTK, but it has slightly better time to kills and slightly better bullet velocity. So it's a little bit better than the Fin, but still it's kind of fallen out of the meta a little bit with the nerfs they've given it. UGM Burst, this used to be ridiculously good. It was just a ton of fun to use because it's that automatic burst where you can just hold the trigger down and it'll keep firing the bursts over and over. But it's gotten some nerfs and it's not quite as good anymore. It is one of those guns that has no damage drop off, so it says infinity there for the range. You get 951 millisecond TTK at all ranges, but it also has really low bullet velocity, so that's why I gave it a 9, because it's super accurate and has relatively good time to kill compared to some of the other super accurate guns. But for most people, it's probably not, probably not a 9 out of 10. Just for me personally, I really like burst guns, and this gun feels pretty good to me still, despite the lower bullet velocity and the worse TTK. So during the KGM40 meta, I actually still preferred the STG myself. The STG can have really good mobility, really good reload time, really good ADS time, and still be very accurate at range. So you can see I've given it a little bit worse accuracy score than the UGM Burst and the KGM40, but it has slightly better weighted average TTK. Still not a good TTK, but it's really accurate, and like I said, it has all those other perks. So I gave it a 9 out of 10. I think the STG is still a very, very viable, very good choice. It still has good bullet velocity, so you can hit those shots at range. Yeah, it just has a lot of really good things going for it. M13 is also very good. I gave it 80% accuracy. It has good time to kill up close, good time to kill at range. The weighted average TTK is the lowest we've seen so far, down at 825. So that's a very good weighted average time to kill from 20 meters out to 100 meters. It also has good bullet velocity. So the M13 is really good, but the reason that it's held back a little bit, just the optic. It doesn't have that 3 to 6x optic. They did nerf that in Season 5, but it's still better than pretty much all the Modern Warfare optics. The M13 also is going to have really terrible mobility just because it's a Modern Warfare gun. The ADS strafe speed, ADS movement speed, things like that are just atrocious with any of the Modern Warfare guns. So that's kind of what holds it back in my opinion. I think the STG is going to be a better choice for most people. But the M13 is definitely a very viable option. Next up on the list here, we have the AN94. So I gave this a score of 7, so 1 point behind the M13. It's extremely accurate, just like the M13. Has good time to kill up close, just like the M13. A little bit less damage range, worse TTK range, and then the weighted average TTK is worse as well, obviously. But the thing that holds it back is that these TTK numbers are if you hit that hyperburst. So the first 3 shots happen really quickly with the UGM, and then with the AN94, and then it shoots much slower after that. So this is really kind of a theoretical time to kill that you're probably not going to actually get very often, but it's still a pretty viable gun and has good bullet velocity. It's just kind of a little bit worse M13. So you can think of it like that, basically, compared to everything I just said about the M13. Next up, we have the Automaton. This is just a really good gun right now all around. We got 9 out of 10 score, so one of the absolute best. Very accurate. Has pretty good close TTK, a little bit worse long TTK, but it has really good damage range, and it leads to a pretty decent weighted average TTK for a highly accurate gun. It does have a little bit lower bullet velocity, which makes it a little bit harder to hit people at range when they're moving. But the weighted average time to kill at 887 is the second best we've seen behind the M13, and it has a lot of other things going for it. It's going to have better mobility, bigger magazine, all of those kind of things that are kind of not really listed on here. That's why it has a 9 out of 10 versus the M13's 8 out of 10. I think those just ADS time, mobility, things like that aren't listed on this kind of push it ahead of the M13 a little bit. Next up, we have the Grau 556. So this is a 75% accuracy, 8 out of 10 score. The reason I gave it an 8 out of 10 is it's extremely similar to the M13 in terms of recoil. You can pretty much think of it just like an M13 that shoots a little bit slower. It feels extremely similar. And you can see the weighted average time to kill is very, very similar to the M13. Bullet velocity is about the same as the M13. All the things I said about the M13 in terms of mobility are going to be true for the Grau as well. And then you can also see the Kilo 141. Again, very, very similar. The Grau, M13, and Kilo are all basically interchangeable. So pretty much just pick the one that has the recoil that feels the best to you. They're all very viable, but they are going to be a little bit worse than some of the Vanguard guns just for mobility reasons. Cooper Carbine has been in a great spot for a long time, so we got an 8 out of 10 here. It's edging on a 9 out of 10. It's a very, very good gun. Extremely low recoil. Gave me a 70% accuracy, approximately. Again, these are all kind of like approximate numbers. I didn't actually find some way to record how many shots I was putting in that window. It was just kind of a feel thing and be like, oh, well, this one feels a little bit more accurate than that one, and that one I put it at 75, so this one's got to be like an 80. It's not really a real number that I actually measured. But the Cooper has very good close time to kill, very good long time to kill, but it does have a short damage range. that doesn't really matter because even its long time to kill is faster than a lot of these up close. So its weighted average time to kill is the new leader. So it's kind of on the edge of being a 9. For me, I just feel like I don't hit quite so many shots with it, and that might be because of the bullet velocity. Bullet velocity down at only 865 despite this really phenomenal weighted average TTK. Just for me makes it feel not quite as effective. I talked about the kilo already. The M16 is great, but the reason I gave it a 6 out of 10 is just because it's really difficult to use. It's hard to hit your shots with that low bullet velocity and the burst, trying to control the recoil inside that burst. Very fun gun to mess around with, has a good weighted average time to kill because it has no drop-offs, so that 860 millisecond time to kill is pretty much consistent at any range. But yeah, low bullet velocity, somewhat difficult to control recoil, makes it kind of not great to use for most people. Next up, we have the Vargo. The Vargo's in a phenomenal spot right now. I gave it a 9 out of 10. Has really good accuracy, pretty good time to kill up close, pretty good time to kill at range, really good weighted average time to kill, 817. This is a little bit faster than the M13, and full velocity is very good. So all around, the Vargo is just a really good, standard style AR right now. So we'll talk about that probably in the recommended builds because I do think it's one of the best guns right now. We got the RPD on here as well. RPD, I gave a 9 out of 10. It's kind of edging on an 8 just because of the LMG mobility, but it's super, super accurate, has good time to kill, really good damage range, out to 60 meters, which leads to a really good competitive weighted average time to kill at 832. Slightly worse than the Vargo, but basically the same. A little bit lower bullet velocity, so it's a little bit worse than the Vargo, but like there's just not enough numbers for me to, rank these all perfectly. So I do think this is like an 8.5, so it's a little bit worse than the Vargo, but I still gave it a 9 because I do think it's a very, very close to meta weapon. Next up, we have the King. So the UGM, I've talked about this before. It's been in a very good spot for a very long time without the burst barrel. And now, after all the nerfs to everything else, the UGM has become pretty much the king. So I gave it a score of 10. It's the only weapon on the list with a score of 10. It's relatively accurate. The first few shots are pretty rough. And then after that, it's pretty controllable. And it has just phenomenal time to kill. So 634 millisecond time to kill up close and under 700 at range. So this is by far faster killing than everything else on this list. You can see the weighted average out to from 20 to 100 meters is 683 milliseconds, which is about 100 milliseconds faster than the next fastest thing on the list. So the Cooper Carbine was 775. So almost 100 milliseconds faster weighted average time to kill. And in my notes over here, it has a decent amount of recoil and lots of screen shake. It has LMG mobility. It melts through your ammo, so it shoots very fast. So you run out of ammo really quick with that 125 round mag. And it doesn't have low bullet velocity. So there are some things that aren't really tangible that are on that are kind of negatives about the gun that aren't shown on this list, but even with those I still think it's the best weapon for Caldera right now. So the Bruen Mk9 is actually in a pretty good spot as well. I gave it a 7 mostly for LMG mobility reasons. LMG mobility plus modern warfare mobility means this thing is like just running through mud compared to other weapons, even other LMGs like the UGM. The UGM has better mobility for sure than the Bruen. So I gave it a 7 out of 10, but it's very accurate, has even better time to kill than the UGM inside that 50 meters. So it's really good in terms of time to kill. Also has a decent time to kill at range, but not quite as good as the UGM, leading to a weighted average of 766, which is now number 2 behind the UGM. So it's actually in a really good spot. 7 might have been a little bit harsh. You might be able to sneak it into like an 8 out of 10. I'm going to change it to an 8 just because it has such good time to kill in that first range that it's going to just melt people. Like I don't think... Let's look real quick, but the only other thing that's going to be competing with it up close is going to be like the AS44 and the Whitley in terms of time to kill in that first range. So inside 50 meters, the Bruen's going to melt people pretty much faster than anything else out there, but it does have, LMG ADS, LMG mobility, things like that. So it's going to be a little tough to use, but it is a good weapon right now. It has a little bit lower bullet velocity too, since it's the LMG just has a little bit worse sometimes. Next up, we have the Volk. The Volk is going to be one of those guns that's going to show up being a lot better for the small maps. But for the big map, it got a little bit of a nerf in terms of damage and recoil. So it used to be really good. It was good for like 2 weeks. And unfortunately, it got nerfed pretty quick on the big map, but it's still going to be really good on small maps. I gave it a 7 out of 10 for Caldera. Pretty accurate, really good time to kill up close, pretty short damage range, decent TTK range, good bullet velocity. So overall, it's a pretty good gun. It has great mobility, but it does have that small magazine, which is a big negative for really long range engagements where you're not going to hit that many shots. It's only a 45 round mag, so that's kind of what holds it back for Caldera. Next up, we have the AUG from Cold War. This is going to be very similar to the M16. Basically, everything I said for the M16 is going to be true for the Cold War AUG as well. M91, I gave it a 5 out of 10 compared to the Bruen's 8 out of 10, even though they're extremely, extremely similar. It has a worse TTK than the Bruen up close, same damage range, a little bit better TTK at range than the Bruen, leading to a weighted average that's about the same, but it has much lower bullet velocity, and it just feels even heavier than the Bruen. So the mobility's really bad. Overall, it's not in a great spot, but it's actually surprisingly like been forgotten about. But after all the nerfs to the other guns, the M91 has, you know, kind of snuck up to being almost good enough to be a viable weapon. But I really think it's the mobility, the reload time, things like that hold it back. Vargo-S is the next up. I gave it a 7 out of 10 for Caldera. This is another gun that's probably going to be a little bit better on the small maps. Recoil is surprisingly pretty good. There's some weird like reticle shift away from the center of the screen that the Vargo-S has. But it still has a pretty low recoil, and you could get used to that for sure. It has really good damage range. It's just kind of an okay gun, so don't have much else to say. It just kind of fits in middle of the pack. SA-87, again, I tried to make this gun work so many times back in Verdansk because it always looked like it was really good compared to like the Grau and things like that, but it never quite kept up with the M13, the M4, the Kilo, the Grau. All those things were just always a little bit easier to control with similar time to kill, and it just kind of never really fit in. So that's kind of where it still is, even after all the changes that have been made. I gave it a 6 out of 10. It's a decent gun, but there's just better options. The FARA, so the FARA is very, very similar to the Vargo. It's kind of just a worse Vargo right now. So everything I said about the Vargo is pretty true about the FARA. They both have kind of S-shaped recoil patterns, but the Vargo just kind of fits in a little bit better in the current meta. XM4 is still decent, but it's just not going to keep up with, again, like the Vargo. So the Vargo is going to be the best Black Ops Cold War weapon with the RPD. XM4 is okay, but just overall the Vargo is going to be better. Whitley's surprisingly a pretty good option right now. So the 45 round mag gives it a quick reload time, not like an LMG long reload time. It has really phenomenally good time to kill up close, 629 milliseconds out to 50 meters, leading to a really good weighted average TTK of 766. So that's exactly the same as the Bruen, from 20 meters to 100 meters. And then the Whitley's going to have a little bit better bullet velocity than the Bruen. So it's really, really similar to the Bruen, but it's going to have better mobility. So it's kind of like an 8.5, a little bit better than the Bruen, but not quite good enough to be like a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. I'm going to start going a little bit faster through these last few. DP27, just like my note says over here, it's just kind of meh. It's like, it's okay, it's usable, but there's just other stuff that's quite a bit better. AK-74U I included just for fun because it's an SMG that has higher bullet velocity. Not very good, doesn't have any damage range, doesn't have great time to kill. But as far as like a sniper support, it'd probably be pretty decent. AS-44, the recoil is just still too much. It has phenomenal weighted average TTK. The only gun that beats it is going to be the UGM. So AS-44 is going to be pretty solid on small maps. But at least you get that AR mobility and reload time. So it's going to be pretty good on small maps. But for Caldera, the engagement ranges are just too long for that recoil. The bar, unfortunately, not very good. After the nerfs to the long barrel, the heaviest barrel that the bar had, it just has too much recoil really to be used anymore. Nikita has phenomenal time to kill and really long damage range, leading to a really good weighted average time to kill. And the recoil is okay at like mid range. So again, this is like a small map gun. It works really well on Fortune's Keep and Rebirth Island, but as soon as you extend that range out to like 60 meters and beyond, it has a very zigzaggy recoil pattern, and it's just kind of impossible to hit your shots at range with this thing. But it is going to be really good inside, 50, 60 meters. C58, again, is just a worse Vargo. It doesn't even really have better time to kills, but it has much worse recoil, so it's just kind of not worth using right now. MG82, same story. It has all the negatives of being an LMG. It does have phenomenal time to kill, 751 weighted average time to kill, but there's just so many negatives to it. The recoil is really hard to control, and it has all the LMG negatives that it's just kind of not worth using. And then quickly, I want to mention these 4 guns. So the Gorenko, M1 Garand, SVT, and all the other Marksman rifles that now use assault rifle ammo. I honestly just have not had time to digest those and try them out. So I didn't want to include them in this because I don't know where they stand yet. The EX1 as well is a very complicated weapon with a million different ways to build it. It can literally be every type of weapon in the game with the attachments it has, so that's going to be its own video. Marksman rifles will be their own video, and I'll probably include the Gorenko in the Marksman rifle video because it's a very popular weapon right now to actually use basically as a Marksman rifle. So Those will be separate. Just wanted to mention that because I know some people will ask about them. All right, let's get into some recommended builds. So we're going to start with basically a Modern Warfare long-range weapon. So M13, Kilo, M4A1, Grau, all these things basically are built the same. So you just use monolithic suppressor, Tempest, Marksman, or whatever the longest barrel is, whatever the heaviest barrel is. You should be able to tell based on which ones have recoil control and which ones are physically the largest on the gun. Commando foregrip, the biggest magazine, 60 round mag, is going to be what you're going to have for most of them. And then VLK, pretty simple. They are all built the same way, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. The one that's a little different is the Bruen. So the Bruen, you're probably going to use the default 100 round mag. You'll use monolithic, the longest barrel, commando foregrip, default magazine, tac laser, and then VLK. So that's the only difference for those. So for the Bruen, you just swap that mag for tac laser, and you'd be good to go. So the UGM recommended build is going to be exactly the same as my Season 4 Reloaded recommended build. We've got MX silencer, the XL 214 barrel, 3 to 6x. I don't know how to say this. Mercier WT stock. Strafe angle gives the best visual recoil and horizontal recoil help, so that's why we're going to use that. The 6.5 Sakura 125 just seems to be the best feeling of the magazines, and you kind of need that extra ammo because this thing has such a high fire rate that it just melts through your ammo, so having a 125 is really helpful. Lengthened bullet velocity, obviously. Hatch grip I like the most pretty much on the Vanguard weapons for most cases because it helps with both horizontal and vertical a decent amount in terms of recoil. And then tight grip is really helpful for this gun. So the first few shots with this are going to be pretty rough, but then after that the recoil is very manageable. So in those close range engagements, you'll probably be able to hit some of those first few shots, and then after that you'll just melt them with very little recoil. And then at longer ranges, you might miss most of those first, 5 or 6 shots, and then you'll start being able to hit the rest. So it's just the best gun right now. It's really phenomenal. You can also build it for initial recoil, but I think in most cases, sustained recoil is going to be a little bit more important for the long range fights. So for the Vargo, this is the Black Ops Cold War Vargo. Exceptionally good weapon right now, all around. One of the best in the game for sure. The build's a little bit different. So we've got Grau suppressor, the last barrel, the heaviest barrel. And then we actually use the Spetsnaz speed grip. So this is something that the guys over at Sim discovered. The speed grip actually helps more with horizontal recoil than the Spetsnaz grip, which is not how it normally is for the Black Ops Cold War guns. And because the Vargo has very S-shaped recoil, it's very important that you minimize that horizontal recoil just so you can hit as many shots as possible at range. So using the Spetsnaz speed grip, this gun feels great. It feels great with the regular Spetsnaz grip as well, which actually also helps with vertical. But overall, I would recommend the speed grip. We get 60 round mag and axial arms 3x. So for all the Black Ops Cold War guns, the build's the same, except you're going to normally use the Spetsnaz grip. So for any other Black Ops Cold War guns, like the FARA or the XM4, just use the Spetsnaz grip or the field agent grip if it's a gun that has a field agent grip. RPD is also one of the best guns in the game right now, as I covered before. And this is my favorite build for it. It's a little bit weird, but instead of using an underbarrel to help with the recoil, I swapped that out for the Serpent Wrap, which gives me better ADS time. And then I use the SUSAT multi-zoom, which really helps with visual screen shake and recoil compared to the Axial 3X. So kind of similar ADS to if you use the Axial 3X in an underbarrel like the Field Agent. But overall, just I think visual recoil is really important. So for me, this is my favorite build for the RPD. It's an excellent gun, very fun to use. I'd give it a try. I really like the SUSAT because it has that 2x up to 6.2x zoom. So it's very similar to the 3 to 6x from Vanguard, so you don't have that negative so much here, but it does kind of kill your ADS times. So this is going to feel very slow, but still it's a great gun, and I have a lot of fun using it. All right, so this is going to be recommended for the Automaton. Let me put my pretty camo on there real fast, and then we can go back and look at the attachments. So we got MX silencer. That's just tends to be the pick always for the long range weapons. The 600mm barrel, 3 to 6x. The Zac Skeletal's an initial recoil stock, and it also helps with your strafe speed and ADS movement speed, which is very nice for a long range gun to be able to dodge some of those shots. I've heard that potentially initial and sustained recoil kind of cancel each other out a little bit, so I need to investigate that. I'm going to be honest, I just don't know if this is right or not right now. So this is how I run it. It feels great, but I do need to check into this initial recoil, sustained recoil, see if they kind of mess with each other a little bit. Hand stop tends to be one of my favorite picks. Helps with the vertical and horizontal and doesn't really have any downsides for a long range gun. And then the 75 rounds Sakura tends to be the best option for this. The other ones just either give too much recoil or just the mags are too small. So just the default caliber magazine. Hatch grip for vertical and horizontal, and then on hand or whatever you want to use here, you can use defender or fully loaded if you want to spawn in with full ammo. All right, last gun I'm going to cover today is going to be the STG. So I think the STG is one of the top guns in the game right now, and it has been ever since, even after the nerf. I think it's still one of the top guns. But the build that I'm going to recommend is going to be MX silencer, 760mm barrel, 3 to 6x optic, and then for stock there's two good ones. So the Constance tactical is going to help with your initial recoil and ADS movement speed. Makes you a lot more mobile during fights, which is really nice in a lot of cases. But the weighted stock is also going to be really good. You probably hit a few more shots with the weighted stock just because it overall helps with recoil control and aiming stability more than the Constance is going to help with your recoil. So it's a trade-off. If you want to feel a little more mobile, use the Constance. If you want to have a little bit better recoil, use the weighted stock. I really like the hand stop, as I've talked about. It doesn't hurt your ADS time like the Carver does, but it still helps with the vertical and horizontal recoil. Still, the 7.62 Gorenko is going to be the mag to choose, the 50 round mag. Just helps with your fire rate and doesn't really hurt too much in other ways. Also helps with recoil a bunch, makes you a little more mobile. It is going to hurt your damage, but it's worth it for that extra fire rate and lower recoil. Lengthened always. This gun has very little horizontal recoil, so we're going to go with Pine Tar just because that tends to help the most with the vertical recoil. And then for perk 1, acrobatic, sleight of hand, focus, vital, all viable choices. If you want a little bit more damage, it's very rarely going to affect time to kill, but every now and then it will. Vital's an okay choice. I need to look into focus to see if it's actually really doing anything. Flinch resistance and flinch in general, some sort of metric for flinch is on my list of things to do. I know exactly how to measure it. I just haven't had time to get to it. Acrobatics always good for mobility. Sleight of hand's always good for reload. And then perk 2 again, on hand, defender, fully loaded, whatever you want to use there. They're all pretty decent. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video. It's going to be a long one just because there's so much to cover, so many semi-viable weapons. They've done a great job balancing this all out. Been grinding on the website. TGD 2.0 is in the works. It's going to be so much better than the current version of TrueTechData, so I'm really excited for that. As always, if you guys like the content, don't forget to drop a sub, like, comment on the video. Tell me what your favorite gun is right now. I know most of you are going to say the UGM, but there are benefits to using something like the STG, like the mobility, the reload time, things like that. The STG is still a viable weapon, even though the UGM is going to have the maximum, melt potential of all the weapons. But hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.